Hi, Raheel.
Yes, Anakya. You're able to see my screen. I have the
Yes, Raheel.
presentation open.
Yes.
So, uh, great.
Yes, we have 28 people who have joined in so far. So I think we're good to start with the session. And we're still
Sure,
calling people again, just as a reminder caller.
sure. So, hi, everyone. Good morning. My name is Rahil, and I'm working at Redington Gulf. I'm the partner solution architect here. As you know, the agenda of today's webinar is about the web hosting. What are the options that we have in web hosting, running web application on AWS. So we'll start with a quick introduction of our partner, Burhani, right? Uh, this webinar is conducted in partnership with Burhani. So we'll start with the introduction of Burhani, and then we will move on to the technical topics. Over to you, Kusai. Kusai, can you hear me?
Hi, good morning, everybody. First of all, sorry for the delay. We had some technical glitch, and that's why it took time to start the webinar. So my name is Kusai, and I'm the founder and CEO of Burhani. We are an enterprise cloud and managed IT services company in Dubai. We've established since 2003, and our core focus is in delivering cloud technologies to small and medium businesses and enterprises. We are partners for AWS and Microsoft, and most of the solutions that we'll be discussing in today's session also, and in future sessions, we have expertise in-house in that. Apart from that, we have 3 locations. We have offices in Dubai, in India, and in North America, and we serve these 3 geographies through our team, which is locally present in each location. I think this is from my side. We will share the contact details after the webinar. So if anybody wants to join or get in touch with us, they can do that. Thank you.
Thank you, Kusai. Thank you, Kusai. Thanks for the introduction. All right, so let's get started. So when we talk about scaling our web application on AWS, there are a lot of articles, there are a lot of content which you can find on Google, and sometimes it can be really overwhelming. So you may get confused where to start. What is autoscaling actually? What autoscaling is doing, right? So it can be confusing, especially when you are beginning your journey into the cloud. So we will try to demystify some of the terms related to autoscaling, and we'll try to address uh, multiple scenarios where you may have a small web application, how you will run it, and we'll also take use cases of enterprise application and maybe the application which are very, very popular. So we'll discuss the strategies around those web application, right? So first thing we have to understand that there's not a single thing that fixes everything, right? You cannot use a hammer to fix all your problem. There are specialized tools, there are specialized services which AWS offer for multiple use cases. For example, you cannot use SQL Server for all as your database for all the application, right? It may work. It has certain use cases. It has certain capabilities. So it's advisable, to realize all the options that we have and to use the tools and services accordingly. So what do we need first when we are thinking about web application and we're thinking about web application hosting? What we really need, right? We need infrastructure. We have to understand, about the AWS infrastructure. This is a relatively old data. Now we have 25 regions. There are 80 availability zone and more than 200 point of presence. So you can see the information here given in the link. You can visit this link, infrastructure.aws, and you can find more details about AWS infrastructure, right? So when we start our journey, when we discuss about web hosting application, it's very important to understand AWS global infrastructure, what a region is, what availability zone is, what point of presence is. In a nutshell, region is your geography, right? Where you're going to host your application. Inside regions, you have availability zone. You can consider availability zone as a collection of data center. So your web server can be served from any of these availability zone within a region. And then you have point of presence, which you call location for caching and for serving DNS traffic. This is a short summary about AWS Global Infrastructure. I highly encourage you to visit this link and read more about the AWS infrastructure. As you know, AWS offers multiple services related to compute, related to storage, related to security and compliance. So AWS has a really wide portfolio. When we talk about migration, there are native tools which AWS offer for migration. These are tools which are owned by AWS and which are managed by AWS, right? We're not talking about any third-party tool. Similarly, when we talk about core services, there are services related to compute, services related to networking, storage, managed databases, which we'll see in upcoming slides. When you run analytics, there are multiple services which you can use for data streaming, for building data warehouses, for creating data pipelines, for your ETL process, right? You can use Glue for ETL to run your ETL jobs. Similarly, for DevOps, there are a number of services which AWS offers, especially for container orchestration, container management. There are tons of services. So just to give you an idea, AWS have services for multiple use cases. And technically, it's not possible to discuss about all these services in a single webinar. So our focus will be core services, and we'll touch base upon some of the services related to DevOps and monitoring. Right. So when we talk about building a web application, or when we talk about running a web application, what are the building blocks, right? So the building blocks could be, you need compute. First of all, you need block storage. You may need object storage. You may need, load balancing. You would need a backend database, right? It could be SQL database. It could be NoSQL database, right? You may have a messaging queue requirement for your application for decoupling. You may want to use some kind of a notification service for alerting or for managing certain events. Similarly, you may have a requirement for shared file system. So as you can see in the slide, some of the services which AWS offer is highly available out of the box, right? That means you don't have to plan for high availability for these services like CloudFront. CloudFront, which is your CDN, is CDN offering from Amazon. It's highly available out of the box, so you don't have to do anything. All you have to do is to create a distribution point and then start using the service. Similarly, Route 53, which is the managed DNS service from Amazon, it is also highly available out of the box. S3, which is very popular, which is used for object storage, it's also highly available out of the box, right? But there are certain services which is not highly available, like your compute. If you're running a web server, for example, on AWS, it most likely to run on EC2 instance. So EC2 instance is not highly available out of the box, right? It's not highly available right away. So you have to plan for the high availability. You may have to run multiple EC2 instances, right? And you may have to put those EC2 instances behind a load balancer so that the loads can be equally shared. Similarly, block storage is also not highly available. So when we talk about block storage, it's EBS. So EBS volume will sit in an AZ, will sit in a, will be created in an availability zone. So if you have a requirement to share, to get a storage for multiple EC2 instances, you may consider using EFS, which is highly available out of the box. But EBS is not. Similarly, relational database services, well, it could be highly available, it could not be highly available. You may go with a multi-AZ architecture, or you may, but even with multi-AZ architecture, it's active passive. So you only one node will be available and you can access only one node, right? But there is an option for high availability for RDS. Similarly, VPC, your virtual private cloud, which is the virtual networking in AWS, it's not highly available. So you have to plan for the high availability. It's very important to understand those building blocks, because then we will have our architecture around those services, which we'll see in the upcoming slide. Now, what are some of the considerations? Let's try to understand. So when we talk about a web application, there is a cycle. So we basically learn, then we build, and then we measure the performance of our application. And it's a continuous process. So, right, we add more and more features. We will do, we'll execute multiple builds, and then we will measure the performance of our application. And the measurement could be against KPIs. So you may have a business objective, you may have certain business SLAs. So you will measure your application against those SLAs and KPI and just make sure that you meet the business goal. So it's a continuous cycle. Some of the important aspect of running the application is that you have to identify and avoid undifferentiated heavy lifting. So wherever possible, you should leave the heavy lifting part to AWS. You should focus more on your core applications, services, and feature, and let AWS do all the heavy lifting. There's an also discussion around serverless versus manage versus run it yourself. So this is again a discussion. You cannot have a serverless architecture for all the components of your web application, whereas at times it is advisable to use microservices to run certain services related to your application, and sometimes it is advisable to run the application on EC2 instance. So we'll try to demystify those points. Let's start from day one, right? So imagine you have planned that you will run a web application in AWS. You will think about hosting. So what are the activities? Let's say, because it's day one, so we're expecting minimal traffic on our application. So a user count would be less. So we can go ahead with a simple architecture, really simple architecture, where we have a two-tier architecture. Our instance will be deployed in a VPC. We'll have a public IP, and we have a database instance. Note that we have Route 53 for DNS management, and users will come over the internet. The queries Route 53 request will be forwarded directly to the Elastic IP, which is attached to EC2 instance. Note that here in this architecture, we don't have a load balancer, we don't have auto scaling. Those things are not there because it's day one, right? We want to start really, really quickly, right? And we want to be up and running in a quick time. And we don't expect a lot of user traffic as well, right? So this architecture may work well, especially when we are starting our journey, right? You can also make use of Lightsail. For those of you who don't know Amazon Lightsail, it is the easiest way to get started on AWS. So in Lightsail, you will have a console where you can launch your web servers with particular software configuration. For example, if you're running WordPress, if you're running Joomla, so these images are built in, and it can be launched straight away from the Lightsail console. What is the advantage? Advantage is you can be up and running very quickly. You don't have to configure the WordPress. It's already there. You just have to click launch and configure the backend database. You can also choose from multiple plans. For those of you who are very much familiar with the web hosting or shared hosting concept, you want to pay on a monthly basis, right? You want to pay a fixed amount on a monthly basis. So Lightsail gives you the flexibility to choose from multiple plans that include bundled compute, storage, and networking, right? So you don't have to be worried that you may exceed your budget. So it comes with a fixed plan. You can benefit from a low predictable price. So the prices will be predictable. You won't see an increase in the price, right? This we already discussed. You can spin up a fully configured server in seconds. So whether it is Amazon Linux, whether it is particular software, you can launch those servers in seconds. You don't have to configure backend, networking, or you don't have to configure the VPC aspect. So it will be taken care by Lightsail. And you can scale with you can scale with access to AWS service. So with Lightsail, you can also integrate or you can integrate Lightsail application with your analytics engine, with your data warehouse, right? It is possible. And Lightsail also comes with a lot of automation capability. So it has its own API. You can refer to AWS CLI for some of the automations. These are some of the advantages of Lightsail, right? Especially it is handy when you are new, when you're starting your application. It's a useful tool. Now let's talk about database option. What options we have when we talk about database. So database, as you all know, it can be run on EC2 instance. You manage everything. You will get a Linux or Windows machine, and you will install the database on that machine, and you manage everything from the scratch. You are responsible for configuring the database, configuring the backup. You're responsible for database creation, patching. It's self-managed. So basically, you'll have more control, but at the same time, it's time-consuming. So you need more effort to configure the database. Most of the people prefer that. What most of the people prefer is to go with a fully managed solution, which is Amazon RDS, Amazon DynamoDB, or Amazon Neptune for graph database if you're into graphs, right? The advantages of using a managed service is that you can offload a lot of activities to AWS. For example, backups, patching will be taken care by AWS. All you have to do, you have to create a database instance, and using the instance, you can connect the database to your application and start creating the databases. Right, so it's simple. You can start the database configuration easily, and you'll be up and running in a quick time. Now, AWS also have Aurora, which again comes under RDS, Amazon RDS. So for those of you who don't know Aurora is a MySQL or Postgres compatible database offered by AWS with a lot of performance enhancement, with a lot of read and write throughput improvement. So Aurora offers a lot of you can create up to 15 read replicas, right? So if you want to have multiple read replicas for your read intensive queries, you can do that. It supports up to 15 read replicas. You can automatically scale storage of your database. So this auto scaling will work for storage here, and it can scale up to 64 terabyte. Plus, it is also possible to have continuous backup taken into the S3 bucket. So Aurora backup can be directly shipped to S3, and you can store the backup in S3 for compliance requirement, or maybe for governance requirement or replication. There are multiple use cases why you want to store backups in S3. Aurora also offers 6-way replication across 3 zones. So this Aurora works in a very interesting way. It's not like any other RDS. So it works in 6-way replication. So that means if you create an Aurora instance, 6 copies, 6-way replication will happen, and 6 copies will be there. So you can imagine how the performance and also uh, the availability of this database. So it comes with a very high SLA. Along with that, if you go with the higher Aurora instance, it comes with huge performance improvement, which you will not get in MySQL or PostgreSQL. And for the database administrator who are very familiar with MySQL or Postgres SQL database, it's a very easy transition, right? So you can easily transition your skill to Aurora. Now, Aurora also comes with serverless options, right? And this is very interesting. I haven't seen any other managed database, offered by any other cloud provider that comes with a serverless option. So what is Aurora Serverless? It is on-demand auto-scaling database for application with variable workload. When we say auto-scaling database, that means you don't have to define the capacity for your Aurora instance. You don't have to say, I need this much memory, I need this much vCPU. Auto-scaling will take care of the scaling aspect of the Aurora engine, right? So what you'll get with Aurora Serverless, you'll get a database endpoint, which you'll get with any other RDS instance. And Aurora will automatically scale as per the traffic requirement from the application or as per the load from the application, right? It has a warm capacity pool, which can be used in time when there is a peak or when there is a spike in the request. And Aurora also can be used as a shared distributed storage. So it's really interesting. I don't think any other cloud provider offers a serverless offering, especially with the database, right? It's really interesting how it works. So with Aurora Serverless, you can start up on demand and shut down when not in use. That's the pay for idle resources. Guys, am I audible?
Yes.
All right, because I got a prompt that my internet is not stable, so just wanted to confirm. Thanks for confirmation. Right. So with Aurora Serverless, you don't have to pay for a spare capacity. So even if your database is not doing any activity, or if you don't have any traffic, you don't have to pay anything, right? Whereas if we talk about any managed RDS instance or even Aurora standard, so you will have a capacity, you will have an instance which comes with a vCPU and memory. So even if there is no traffic, you'll incur the cost of that particular instance. But that's not the case in Aurora Serverless. Another cool thing about Aurora Serverless is that it scales automatically with no instance to manage, right? You pay per second for the database capacity you use, right? You can define read-write capacity, and based on that, you will be charged, right? Now, this is a very, this discussion is going on for very long, whether I should go with NoSQL, whether I should go with SQL, right? So the short answer to this discussion is it depends, right? So it depends upon your application, what application you're using, what requirement you have, and what team you have, basically. If the team is not comfortable in NoSQL, right, sometimes you have to make an investment, you have to make an investment on training, then only you can think about NoSQL. So it depends on a lot of factors. So let's say in case if you're starting with SQL Server, why do you want to start with SQL Server? Let's explore some of the key drivers. First and foremost, it is an established and well-known technology. So you have been working with SQL for quite some time now, almost 20-25 years, right? A lot of existing codes, community, books, and tools are available for SQL. So you don't have to do a lot of research when we talk about, running SQL queries. So there are a lot of resources which you'll find. And you are not going to break SQL database with your first millions of users, right? It will not break. Even if number of users are more than 1 million, the database will not break and it will scale well, right? And it has some clear patterns to scalability. SQL scaling works in a different way, but there are some set patterns, and you have to depending upon your requirement, you have to use those patterns to scale your SQL server. By the way, when we say SQL, it includes everything. It includes MySQL, it includes SQL Server, Oracle, right? The standard relational databases. We're talking about the standard relational databases. Now, unless you are you're doing something super peculiar with the data, or you have massive amount of the data, right? SQL will work pretty well, right? So if we talk about massive data, I just said massive amount. What is massive? What defines massive amount? So when we talk about massive amount, we are talking about more than 5 terabyte in an year. So when we have to manage 5 terabytes of data in an year, and my application requires that my database scales intensively to meet my data requirement, then I might consider NoSQL, right? Because of the flexibility which NoSQL offers, because I can be really flexible with my database schema, I can use NoSQL, right? That doesn't mean you cannot have a database of more than 5 terabyte on an SQL. You can have, right? But in terms of performance, in terms of read and write, query optimization, it works well with NoSQL, right? Especially with a large data set of 5 TB or more. Now, what else I can do with NoSQL, and what are the other drivers to NoSQL? Let's understand. Super low latency application, for application which requires single digit millisecond latency. NoSQL is a good candidate. Metadata driven data sets, not the key value pair, it's metadata driven data sets. Highly non-relational data. So if you have a data which is non-relational, which doesn't have a schema, let's say, or which doesn't have a particular, in which the data cannot be grouped in a table, then yes, NoSQL is a good candidate. So need schemaless data construct, again, NoSQL will be a good fit. Rapid ingestion of data, thousands of records per second. With SQL, it's gonna take time, right? If you have to ingest thousands of records per second, it's not gonna happen. Thousands of records per second, it's something which SQL is not designed for, right? So if you need rapid ingestion of data, you may consider NoSQL. Similarly, as we discussed in a previous slide, if you have massive amount of data, again in terabyte range, right, 5 TB or more, maybe NoSQL will be a good fit. That doesn't mean it won't work with SQL, but the level of optimization that you can do with NoSQL database, especially with large data set, is far more. Right. So let's go back to our scenario where we discussed about a small application, right, where we have a limited number of audience. So registration and sign-in is our, maybe that's the first step for your application. So what are the options we have? So for registration and for identity management, we may consider Amazon Cognito. So Amazon Cognito works very well with web and mobile application. The developer focus on what is special about their app, how they want to manage their identity, how they'll provide access to federated access to to the application. So Cognito does all of this. So it can handle authorization, it can handle identity management. You can also get shared token, AWS credential. You can also have SAML-based authentication to your web application. So it's a really cool service, especially for registration and for identity management. Now let's take another scenario where we have, this time we have a slightly bigger user base, right? More than 100 in this case. So we may have to, the architecture, if you see, it's pretty much the same. Route 53, Elastic IP instance, and now we are using an RDS instance. So we can use our preferred database, whatever works well for the application. And with RDS, you will have a lot of flexibility. You can take automated backup. You can, Amazon will take care of the patching, and you can focus purely on the database, right? So still pretty much, I would say it's a replatforming approach. The architecture would be pretty much the same, right? What about more users? What about more than 1,000 users, right? So if we have more than 1,000 users and if we have a bigger user base now, then we have to first understand, what is horizontal and what is vertical scaling, right? Because when we deal with this many users, with more than 1,000 users, we have to think about scalability. So there are two key terms when we talk about scalability. One is horizontal scaling and the other one is vertical scaling, right? So horizontal scaling, as you can see in this picture, we're adding more and more instances. We are basically adding more servers to the pool in a different word, right? Whereas vertical scaling, we are increasing the capacity of existing servers. So the existing servers become bigger, bigger, and bigger. That's called vertical scaling, right? I hope it's clear. So we're going to need a bigger box, right, when we talk about vertical scaling. So simplest approach is to resize the instance. You can also make use of provisioned IOPS to give better performance for your block storage. You also have many IO intensive instances. So if you have a particular IO requirement, so you can make use of IO specialized instances. There are many memory optimized instances. There are many CPU optimized instances which AWS offers. So in this case, depending upon your use case, depending upon the traffic, you may have to resize your instance. So you may have started with a T3 Nano, very small server for 1 or 2 users, but now your audience is big, so you may have to go with a bigger instance, M5-2X large, and even if that doesn't work, you may have to go with an even bigger instance. So that's basically vertical scaling. Now after that, we hit an endpoint. What about if we reach the maximum capacity, C5-9X large, maybe C5-12X large, 24X large. What about after 24X large? Now what we have to do? We have reached the maximum, capacity. What else we can do? What we can do, we can distribute our load by a load balancer, and we can have multiple instances behind the load balancer. So this way, it works well, especially for the web tier. So if you have a web tier, you can put multiple web instances behind the load balancer. And similarly for the database, you can configure high availability using the RDS instance. So with RDS multi-AZ option, you will have a primary and secondary instance created. I don't want to use the word secondary because it's confusing. Actually, what happens, it's a multi-AZ deployment of an RDS instance. So you have a single RDS instance, but it's waiting for the disaster to happen. So it's highly available. But at the time, you can only write to one of the database instances. So you can see instance here and instance here are writing to this primary database only, and the primary is replicating the data to secondary. So there is no write happening on the secondary database, right? This is how RDS works. Now, if we have to share the load, right? We have a load balancer here. Now the question, many of you will have a question, what type of load balancers are available? which load balancer to use in which condition, which situation. So to answer that, you have three types of load balancer available on AWS. It is one is application load balancer, the other one is network load balancer, and third one is classic load balancer. Right. Application load balancer is highly recommended now for any type of load balancing, because you can load balance any of the TCP port from 1 to 65535. You remember, if we revisit our slide, we talk about certain services which are highly available out of the box. So load balancer is one of them. It is highly available out of the box, right? You can have health checks associated with your load balancer. That means you can monitor traffic on certain ports like port 80, 443, or you can monitor certain pages of your application, let's say healthcheck.php or index.php, to make sure that your web servers are healthy. You can also enable session stickiness on your load balancer. You have all monitoring logging options on application load balancer. You can do content-based routing. You can do container. It works well for container-based application also. So content-based routing means we can define certain paths in our application, in our web tree, and the application load balancer is intelligent enough to do the routing between the paths, right? Application load balancer supports WebSocket, and it also supports HTTP2 protocol, right? Now, again, so if you notice, we are scaling now. So what about more than 10,000 users, right? The architecture will look a little bit different here, right? So, here now we have a bigger web tier, right? More and more instances are there in the web tier. So not only we are doing horizontal scaling, not only we are doing vertical scaling, but we are also doing horizontal scaling, especially for our web tier, right? So again, the architecture looks good here. So we have Route 53. Route 53 will forward the traffic to load balancer, and load balancer will load balance all our web server instances, right? And the instances again will communicate with our Amazon RDS instance. So Amazon RDS will be in multi-AZ deployment, where we have a secondary instance, but it is just waiting for the failover to happen. Ultimately, all my queries will be served by primary RDS instance, right? So the only difference here is that we have a bigger web tier, more instances in the web tier, and we also have our RDS instance. Basically, the web tier will communicate with our primary RDS instance. What more? So now you have realized that you're getting a lot of read queries from the application. Now let's say we are building an analytics use case, or we might want to build a quick clickstream query, right? We want to run a clickstream query just to understand how many users are visiting particular page, right? So we may run a lot of read, we may send a lot of read requests to our primary RDS instance for analytics and other purposes. So what we can do, we can introduce read replicas here, right? With read replicas, all my read queries will be taken care by these read replica instances. And again, read replicas can be highly available as well. We can have a read replica spread across multiple AZ, or we can have read replicas created in different availability zones as well. So now we are introducing read replicas to reduce a number of queries on our primary RDS instance. This is another enhancement that we are doing, right? We also, we may also want to offload some more traffic, or we also, want to make use of caching layer, right? To offload some of the traffic to my EC2 instances and to reduce my traffic onto my EC2 instance. So for this purposes, we may introduce CloudFront, right? And the CloudFront will serve as a content delivery network here. And we can create a CloudFront distribution. And our origin could be S3 bucket, and S3 bucket works well for static content or for, for caching images, those kind of contents, right? It works pretty well. With CloudFront, what you don't see in the diagram, you can also integrate CloudFront with your ELB. The load balancer can also be integrated with CloudFront. So the advantage of using CloudFront, there are two major advantages basically. One is that I'm reducing traffic requests that goes to my EC2 instances. So my web tier will work well, right? I don't need that many web instances now, because some of the requests can be served directly from CloudFront. The second advantage is I'm also saving on my data out cost. So if a user comes in and if CloudFront serves the traffic, I'm also saving on my egress traffic. So egress traffic will be from CloudFront, and CloudFront has much better pricing for egress data transfer, right? So we'll talk about S3. S3, as you all know, it's object-based storage. It's highly durable. It's great for static content, and it is infinite storage. From the word infinite means really infinite. You can put 10 terabyte, 20 terabyte, petabyte, doesn't matter. You can have all the data stored in the S3. S3 also supports a single object with 5 terabyte in size. So you can have a single object of 5 terabyte and you can put that object in S3. That is also supported. And S3 comes with encryption at rest and transit option. The CloudFront, which we saw in our diagram, it is good for caching content for faster delivery. It lowers load upon origin. So because the content will be served from the origin, so my backend servers will experience better performance and a lot of loads will be offloaded from the server. You can have dynamic and static content served from CloudFront, as I told you. So you can have content served from S3. You can also have content served from the ELB. So CloudFront can integrate with both. What I don't tell you is that CloudFront can also be used for streaming videos. So if you are into media transfer, or if you're running RMDP videos and you want to create a distribution for streaming videos, you can also use CloudFront. So videos can also be streamed from CloudFront. CloudFront also, you can have your custom SSL certificate for CloudFront. Let's say if you don't want to continue with the CloudFront domain and if you want to continue with your own domain, it's possible to use our own custom SSL certificate, right? If you don't want to use custom SSL certificate, not a problem. Amazon CloudFront gives you a public endpoint, and by default, it will have a CloudFront SSL certificate. CloudFront endpoint SSL certificate, to be precise. You can set a very short time to live, as low as 0 seconds, right? So you're not 0 seconds means the object will be stored cached for 0 seconds. So it's possible to set a very short ETL, and it is optimized for AWS. Now, what will happen if I introduce CloudFront? First and foremost, my response time will increase, right? So my contents will be served faster. And second, my server load will be reduced, right? So response time will increase and server load will reduce. So if you see with no CDN, my response time was higher. And when I introduce CDN for my static content, my response time got reduced. Similarly, server load also got reduced when I introduced CDN. And that's the value of CloudFront. Now, when you integrate CloudFront with your ELB for dynamic content, you can further reduce the response time and you can further reduce the server load. As you can see in the diagram, CloudFront will charge you only for the data that is served via CloudFront. So let's say, suppose, because I just wanted to highlight the pricing aspect as well. So let's say if you don't have a CloudFront in your architecture, so all the traffics will be served by the load balancer. And if you have any egress traffic, so that egress traffic will be served by a web tier. So anything out from the web server from EC2 instance is charged at $0.11 $0.11 per GB. But anything served from CloudFront comes at a much lower cost, $0.05 or $0.04 dollar per GB, depending upon the regions or depending upon the location where the content is served from. But it is much less than data out from a web tier or from S3 bucket. So this way you can also reduce cost by introducing CloudFront. Now, what else we can do? Yeah, you can have you can shift some more load around. So you can have caching nodes. You may introduce ElastiCache for caching the data, right? So we have introduced read replicas. We have introduced caching. We have introduced CloudFront, right? So this should give a better performance. Now, what about ElastiCache? We talked about cache nodes. So cache nodes, the services which Amazon offer for caching is ElastiCache, and ElastiCache comes in two flavors. One is managed Memcached or Redis. So with Redis, you can build a highly available cache nodes, so which can span across AZ. Memcached is not for HA, right? It has its own advantage, but it doesn't offer HA. You can scale from one to many nodes, especially with a Redis option. It's self-healing. It replaces the dead instances. So if your cache node are not responding and if your cache node are not active, so it will automatically replace the dead instance. Caching also, improves latency, so you'll get single-digit millisecond speed. And multi-AZ deployment is also available for ElastiCache, right? Now, if you see, we are for 10,000 users, we may shift even more load. So we may introduce DynamoDB tables, right, for my instances. And when I introduce DynamoDB table, DynamoDB has its own caching mechanism. It works in an interesting manner, right? It is not like your traditional RDS instance. It has its own caching mechanism, right? So by introducing DynamoDB, we can further reduce the latency. That's the important point. Now, if we talk about DynamoDB, let's understand what DynamoDB is. It's a managed NoSQL database offering from AWS. You can provision throughput. It's fast, predictable. It gives you fast, predictable performance. It's fully distributed, fault tolerant. So DynamoDB is again highly available out of the box. One cool thing about DynamoDB is that you can span your DynamoDB across AWS region. So if you have a DynamoDB instance, it can spread across regions, right? There are ways to do that. DynamoDB is JSON compatible. It supports JSON syntax. So item can be up to 400 KB in size. It reduces our TTL. You can set a custom value for TTL. Even very short TTLs are also supported. And you can create DynamoDB streams and trigger. So DynamoDB streams and triggers can help in improving the performance of your database. Like we introduced screen replicas in RDS, you can have DynamoDB streams and triggers. DynamoDB can integrate well with AWS application autoscaling, right? So if you have an AWS application autoscaling for your web tier, that's not a problem. DynamoDB can still work, can still be integrated with your web tier. Also, DynamoDB has its own autoscaling capability, just like Aurora Serverless. So DynamoDB will scale as per your requirement. And it supports global table. Now that our web tier is much more lightweight, right, we can revisit the beginning of our talk. We talked about auto scaling, right? We talked about horizontal scaling, vertical scaling. Let's take an example of Amazon.com, because we haven't discussed auto scaling for web tier. Let's take an example of Amazon.com. So this is the traffic trend for Amazon.com during a week, right? This is the expected traffic. So there is a peak at particular time, right? And after that, at certain time there is less traffic, right? This is the standard weekly traffic for Amazon.com. Now, if we talk about provision capacity, if you have to meet this requirement, what you would do traditionally in the data center, you will provision this capacity. You'll keep some buffer, right? You'll keep a buffer, and then you will provision the resources to meet the to meet the peak, to meet the traffic peak, traffic spike, right? You cannot provision this much capacity, because then the performance will be degraded and you will not be able to manage the traffic requirement. So this is why we over provision, especially in on-premises. Now, if we talk about November traffic, so there are a lot of promotions, there are a lot of sales happening. So traffic was okay for a few days, and then there is a sudden spike, right? Huge spike actually for 2-3 days. And then again, traffic will come back to the normal, right? What we're gonna do in this case, right? Because we have our provision capacity, what we're gonna do in this case? So we'll provision more capacity, right? In on-premises especially. So what we did, we provisioned more capacity, we scaled more, we increased the capacity of our server. Now the buffer is even more, right? If you see, there are a lot of spare capacity, right? So traffic requirement was only 24%, but what we ended up in provisioning 76% more capacity just to meet those spikes which we are expecting in November. Now, once provisioned, it's provisioned, right? You cannot go back, especially when we talk about hardware in on-premises setup. But the good thing in AWS is that you can make use of auto scaling, right? To meet the spike, to provision resources just to meet those spike, right? So if you need web server capacity of 5 server, not a problem, you'll get those 5 server. Now during the spike, you may need web server capacity of 100 servers, you'll get 100 servers using auto scaling. After that, there is a cool down period. So now I need 5 servers again, I have lesser traffic, so you can reduce traffic using auto scaling. Right, so this is the key. This auto scaling lets you do all this magic, right? And this will give you a lot of saving, especially for those applications which has variable traffic, where you cannot predict how much capacity is enough, right? So we're not in a position to guess the capacity. So that's where we can use auto scaling. What it does, it automatically resizes your computing cluster. So you can adjust auto scaling cluster. You can define your capacity, how many minimum and maximum pool of servers we can have. And then auto scaling can happen based on certain threshold, right? It can scale based on, let's say, CPU utilization, or maybe on your network traffic, right? There are a lot of factors on which auto scaling works, or you can use a lot of parameters to scale your auto scaling group. Not only that, auto scaling supports on-demand and spot instances also. Using on-demand for auto scaling is a very standard practice, but the good thing is you can use spot instances also. And by the way, spot instances gives you a lot of saving, right? It is charged at a much lower rate. So using auto scaling with spot instances can give you a lot of cost saving as well. So this is an example how you can create an auto scaling group. So all you have to do is to write the command auto scaling group. Then you have to define the group name. Then you have to define the launch configuration. A launch configuration, for those of you who don't know, is a template, right, which will be used for auto scaling. So if you have a Linux template or a Windows OS template, you can use that template for creating auto scaling group. And then you can define your minimum and maximum size. And the auto scaling group can span across multiple AZ. In fact, it is recommended to span auto scaling across multiple availability zones, right? So this is about, more than 500,000 users. So if you have more than 500,000 users, this is how your architecture would look like. So now we are introducing auto scaling group, right? We have a load balancer, we have an auto scaling group. The auto scaling group works very well for the web tier. So the entire web servers will be will be in an auto scaling group and will be behind a load balancer. Then like our previous architecture, we'll have cache nodes, we'll have RDS instances running in a highly available manner in a multi-AZ deployment. We will have Amazon RDS read replicas for read intensive queries, right? And we will have CloudFront. And to take our architecture one step ahead, we are also using DynamoDB table for global acceleration and also for storing the metadata, right? Now with 500,000 user base, we can also leverage automation, right? Automation will add a lot of value, especially with this huge user base. It is advisable to use automation. So what kind of activities you can automate, right? There are a lot of things that you can automate. You can automate some common tasks like managing your backup, managing your healthy instance count, pre-warming of the load balancer, or you can, manage the configuration. You can automate the configuration management of your EC2 instances. You can manage remote access, no bastion, using the systems manager. This type of activities also can be automated. So you don't have to make use of the bastion server, or you don't have to make use of the jump box. You can directly take the remote access via systems manager. Systems manager can be extended to cloud and on-prem, right? You can also have compliance management and reporting features available on systems manager. So if you are running against, if you're doing a compliance management, if you want to get a report, how many instances are patched, how many instances are not patched, you can also get it from systems manager. You can store, you can have basic and advanced parameter stores. So you can store your secrets in secret manager, and also some of the important parameters related to your application can be stored in systems manager. And it is available at a very reasonable price. It's a very, some of the features of system managers are even free, right? So if you're using EC2 instance, many of these features you can use for free using systems manager. Now, what about, let's try to understand about the AWS infrastructure automation, right? There are two things. One is we can do it ourselves, or we can use highly available services for automation, which is offered by AWS, right? Doing it ourselves means, we manage our own EC2 fleet of instances. We do it through auto scaling. We do it through, we put our servers behind load balancer. This is something which we do ourselves. Similarly, if you are running containers, if your application is running on containers, you can use ECS for container management. This is again do it yourself stuff, because it's not, we have to manage the capacity and we have to put the nodes behind the ECS cluster. Kubernetes is also do it yourself, right? Because in Kubernetes also we have to create clusters and we have to put worker nodes behind the cluster. CloudFormation, again, we have to write the template. The template will create our infrastructure. This is, of course, automation, But again, we are responsible for writing the template, and we have to define all the parameters, right? So the template has to include VPC configuration, EC2 instance specification, ECS if you're using ECS, RDS instances parameters. So this is do-it-yourself stuff. But what we can also do, we can make use of AWS high-level services like AWS Fargate, which is a serverless offering for containers. So here we don't have to manage the infrastructure, high availability, or anything like that. AWS will manage it for me. Similarly, if you run Beanstalk, Beanstalk is again high-level services, which is more of a PaaS offering, and you can create the environment, the application environment using the Beanstalk. For example, if you're running PHP application, you can have a managed PHP, Node.js, or Java environment up and running for you, and this will be taken care by Beanstalk. Opswork is also a very interesting service for managing the configuration and also for managing the AWS configuration and policy rollout. So if you see, if we do it ourselves, we'll have more controls, right? We can be really granular. We can really define what level of networking I want, what can I do, I can be really granular. I'll have more control. But if we take high-level services, it might not be that granular, but ultimately it is more convenient. It takes lesser time, right? So there's a trade-off. So depending upon our requirement, we can either go with these two approaches. There are a lot of services related to AWS coding. So code services are grouped under a different category. It's called coding services catalog from AWS. And if we talk about code related services, first we have to understand the software development cycle and release management, right? So when we talk about coding, it all starts with the development, right? We'll develop our application. We'll store the source code somewhere, right? We'll store source code in a central repository. Then we will build our application. We'll test it and we'll deploy it. So, and this could be for multiple services. If we are following if you're following a service-oriented architecture, or if you're following a microservice architecture, there could be a similar cycle, similar steps for each and every service. So if we talk about development, AWS offers Cloud9, which is an IDE, integrated development environment for the developers, and it supports a number of proprietary languages, right? So you can have an IDE up and running on AWS. Similarly, for storing your code securely, for code version management, version control, you can use code commit, right? For building, you can use code build. By the way, code build can also be used for testing, right? But if you're comfortable in using a third-party tool for code testing, you can very well use those tools. Jenkins is one of them, so very popular. So you can use Jenkins for your code testing. And for deployment, you can use code deployment. And deployment means rolling out the updates, or rolling out those features. So using code deploy, you can deploy your codes to fleet of EC2 instances. And by the way, all this cycle, all this event can be managed and orchestrated through code pipeline, right? So we can define a pipeline, we can define our stages, and all those stages will be taken care by code pipeline. CodeStar, I'll just go through CodeStar very, very quickly. It allows you to develop, build, and deploy applications on AWS. You can start developing on AWS in minutes, right? And you can work across your team. It's very handy, especially if you're a developer. So you can use CodeStar to quickly build and develop your application, and it supports multiple programming languages, right? For our application, for more than 500,000 users, we will also have certain monitoring requirements. We want to monitor metrics, and we want to log all the traffics. We want to understand what customers are saying. right? We want to capture customer feedback in an intelligent manner. We'll try to squeeze as much performance as possible out of each and every service component, right? Making the most efficient use of the resources. This will be our requirement. And basically CloudWatch can help us in meeting those business objectives. So if you see CloudWatch supports a host level metrics, right? So you can get metrics for your EC2 instances, load balancers. You can get performance related metrics. You can also get aggregate level metrics. So if you have an auto scaling group, you can see what is the consumption, what is the utilization of that group, right? You may have 6, 7 servers behind the group, but you can see what is the average performance, aggregate performance, sorry, of your auto scaling group. You can also collect logs in CloudWatch, and you can also have external site performance evaluation done on CloudWatch. So these all will be supported, right? This is the service, right? So CloudWatch, it can collect metrics and logs. It can monitor alarms, and it can monitor your resources. You can set alarms, and you can create dashboard for your resources. Not only that, you can act on these certain events. So let's say if there is an event, if suddenly my resource becomes unresponsive, I can take actions. I can remove that server from my auto scaling group, right? So auto scaling and events are also supported using CloudWatch events. I can analyze my traffic, right? I can analyze trend and do the metric math. And CloudWatch also helps in our compliance and security requirement, especially because it can help us in collecting all the logs. Right. This is about CloudWatch anomaly detection. This is a new feature, so you can you know what looks different without differing static thresholds. So it helps you to analyze traffic or to inspect the traffic over a particular interval, right? So if there is any anomaly, it can be easily detected. Log Insight, again, it's a new feature. So you will be able to query logs, you will be able to create visualization in order to better understand your data. So if you have the logs, you can get more of your logs. Even if you can run SQL queries against your logs, right? But there are further improvements to be made, right? It's the application development and application hosting is a continuous process. So there are more improvements. I think we can add more improvements. And this is to move away from monolithic application, to move away from monolithic architecture, right? So monolithic application means I have everything in this big, huge box, right? All my user interface, business logic, data access is defined in this huge box. It sits in a single box, right? And we don't have any layers. So what we can do, we can move away from monolithic application, and we can move to service-oriented architecture. And what is service-oriented architecture? Right, this is the slide that we talked about. The service level architecture, if you search in Google, you'll find tons of results, but this is not where we want to start. So this is where we want to start, right? First, understand what is service-oriented architecture, not go to the Society of Actuaries, remember, right? It's a service-oriented architecture. But again, if you go to this link, you will find it very confusing. You may get confused about the different terms, right? Let's try to break up those. Let's try to break that complexity. Let's try to break the service-oriented architecture in different tiers. So you'll have presentation tier, you'll have logic tiers, where your APIs will be defined, your business logics will be defined, and you'll have data tier, right? Where your application data will be stored. So SOAing means move services into their own tiers, treat them separately, scale them independently. And this is very important. Scale them independently and treat them separately, meaning no service is dependent on any other service. So let's say if this service is responsible for billing and this service is responsible for user management, this service is responsible for it's a front end service. So all these services are independent. So if my billing breaks, that doesn't mean I'm breaking my front end service also. My front end will still continue to work, right? Only my billing service will not work if I have some problem in my billing. And if you realize, this gives me more flexibility. So what I can do, I can create front end on Node.js. I can build a billing service. I can create billing service in Python, and I can have user management service code written in Java, right? So this also gives flexibility to the developers. It offers flexibility and greater understanding of each and every component, right? So all these components and service will be dependent on one another, will be independent, but they will interact with one another via APIs, right? So in a way, it's completely independent. But when we talk about service consumption, consuming one services or calling one services, it will be done via API. We can also introduce containers, right? We can have a modern application which runs on containers, right? So for that, we may use ECS or EKS cluster, and we can also have Lambda functions. Lambda functions can be front-end with an API gateway, and this can perform a business function as well. Serverless equal to winning, right? That's very true, because you will never pay for idle, right? Serverless means you will use the resource when you need it, and you'll never pay for anything for idle. So don't reinvent the wheels. These are the services which AWS offers, serverless services, and you can start consuming it from day one, right? So API gateway, you can create an API gateway and you can put Lambda functions or any other services behind API gateway. SNS, notification service, again, this is serverless. Simple email services, this is again serverless. You don't have to manage anything for the email, for sending the email notification. Elasticsearch, step function, SQS, these all are serverless service. Let's touch upon, let's talk about SQS and SNS also. So when we talk about SQS, the classic use case for, using queue or messaging queue would be decoupling, right? We want to decouple the interaction from one instance to another. So we want to introduce another component which is responsible for managing the traffic. Otherwise, what will happen if my EC2 instance 1 sends traffic directly to EC2 instance 2, and EC2 instance 2 is having a resource starvation. So that means my messages will be lost, right? So that's where we want to introduce a queue. Queue basically to put all the messages, and this instance can can request for get message query, or can get the messages directly from this queue. So by introducing a queue, I'm actually decoupling my application. So it's reliable, scalable, secure, simple, and now it supports FIFO as well, first in, first out. So you can ensure ordering of your messages as well. So event-driven compute is basically done via Lambda function. So if you have, a requirement to get compute for certain events. Let's say if we put any object in S3 bucket, I want to do certain activities. If an object is stored in S3, I want to update my code and point the images in the object that is getting stored in S3. So I can create a Lambda function for it because it's an event-driven. So event-driven architecture is also very popular, and most of the services which you see here are all serverless, right? So event-driven also means serverless. So you can write what you can do. You can write functions which is triggered by particular event. So let's say if I have data in my Kinesis stream, what I would like to do, I would like to process that data and then store the data into my data warehouse, right? Or I may want to store the data in my Apache Spark or Hadoop cluster. So like that, if you have an event-driven requirement, event-driven compute requirement, you can make use of Lambda function. And similarly, loose coupling sets you free also. So as I discussed in this scenario, so if your instance here is putting the message directly here into instance 2, then instance 2 may run out of resource. We call it resource starvation in technical terms. And then your messages will be lost. By introducing queue, what I'm doing, I'm decoupling my architecture. I'm adding another layer. So my messages will be stored in queue, and this instance 2 will make a get request or get message request to the queue to pull and then process the message, right? So the looser they coupled, the bigger they scale, right? This is rule of thumb. So always have a loosely coupled architecture. So this will also protect you against some sort of attacks. So if you have a malicious user who's making a lot of put message query, so your resources will not die because of starvation. So you have a scaling layer here, you have a queue, and the queue will scale well. And you're also decoupling the interaction. So very important. So whenever possible, you should make use of the queue. And now if we talk about completely serverless web application, this is how it will look like. So you will have client will connect to Cognito for authentication, and then your application will be exposed via API gateway. API gateway may run a Lambda function behind the scene, and the Lambda function may store data again in the serverless database, which is DynamoDB, right? Parallelly, CloudFront, S3, these are all serverless service. So you can make use of CloudFront for caching. These are some of the customers who are already, who are on serverless architecture. And AWS Amplify is a new service basically for Node.js management. Angular can also be run using serverless architecture, right? Now, what about microservice architecture? So we talked about a service-oriented architecture. Service-oriented architecture basically boils down to microservice. So in microservice, we have multiple service, and these are again independent service. So client will make a request to the front-end service, and behind the scene, all other components will be connected via APIs, and the data will be stored in the appropriate databases, right? So when we talk about microservice architecture, you may run microservice on EC2 instance, although this is possible. But when the true beauty of microservice comes with Lambda, or it comes with containers, right? So because containers give you complete service level segregation, so preferred choice to run microservice to have a microservice architecture is container. That doesn't mean you can't have microservice architecture on EC2 instance. You can have, right? But the advantages, the true advantages and the benefit will come from containers. So as you can see, I'm exposing my services via API gateway, and then API gateway will connect to my Lambda function. Lambda function can again connect or can make an API call to another service. And this will be behind a load balancer, and the load balancer will connect you to one of the container, right? This is what is shown in the architecture. X-ray it's for performance monitoring and bottleneck. I'm not going to discuss this in detail because this is not relevant for this webinar. Now, finally, you may have an application which has a very huge user base, more than 1 million users, right? And more maybe. So what we can do, we can exceeding 1 million requests, requires some bit of all the previous things, right? So you have to, whatever we discussed so far, you have to use all those things. You have to have a multi-AZ architecture. You have to have a load balancing between tiers. You have to use auto scaling. You have to have a service oriented architecture. Uh, you have to serve your content smartly via CloudFront S3. You have to make use of caching. You also may have to move the state of the tiers as well, right? So when we talk about 1 million user architecture for a web application, this is how it will look like, right? This is just a blueprint. The actual architecture may depend upon your layers, and may depend upon the services, but this is a high level architecture for 1 million user base. So if you see here, we have a auto scaling group for my web tier. We have an auto scaling group for my worker tier. We have an auto scaling group for my application logic tier, right? It is running on EC2 instances, right? Similarly, we are also making use of event-driven architecture, and we have API gateway, and Lambda function is uh, performing the business function, running the business function, right? So you may have a business function, you can transition it into code and run it via Lambda. Lambda may store the data in a serverless database, which is DynamoDB. So it can get, so if you remember, if you recollect, we started with one server, one database, one Route 53. But as our application demand grows, we have to modify our architecture, right? We have to make use of new services to meet our business requirement. Next big thing is, uh, if we have a even bigger user base, right? So the problem most likely will come in the database, because the more users, the more data you will have, right? So that's where you have to make use of intelligent database services. If SQL is not solving your problem, you may move to NoSQL, right? You may consider database federation, right? You may consider sharding. You may consider uh, uh, you may consider to avoid delays in sharding with the help of NoSQL databases, right? So you have to split up your database by function or purpose, right? We can't have a one big monolithic database which is doing all this, which is doing all the activity. We have to split our database as per the functions. This is how a sharded horizontal scaling will look like for the database. Again, this is not relevant. This is more for analytics use case, so I'll just skip it. You may also want to shift the functionality using the NoSQL database, especially when you have a requirement for terabytes of data. So let's take a quick review, right? What we discussed, and I'm sure this is for 5 million users, but if you have this architecture, it can even work for 100 million users as well, right? So let's take a quick review what we discussed. We talked about multi-AZ, your infrastructure. So always make use of multiple availability zone. Make use of self-service, self-scaling services, right? The services which are highly available out of the box, and the services which scales automatically, just like your application load balancer, S3, Lambda function, SNS, SQS, step functions, and other. You can build in redundancy at each and every level. Think about that. So you should have redundancy at each and every level. You can start with SQL, right? As we saw in our previous architecture, it's not mandatory that you should start with NoSQL from day one. No, you can start with SQL, and then you can move to a NoSQL database. Cache data both inside and outside your infrastructure. So caching data inside, you may use Redis memcached. Outside your infrastructure, you can do it via CloudFront, right? This is again very important, so that our resources are optimized and we send lesser traffic to our backend servers, and make use of the automation tool in your infrastructure. You can also make sure that you have good metrics, monitoring and logging policy or tools set up. You can split tiers into individual services. You can have a service-oriented architecture, use auto scaling once you're ready for it, right? And don't reinvent the wheel. So, use the existing services, use the services which AWS offers, because these services are used by millions and millions of customers. And uh, some of the very popular sites are making use of these services. So you don't have to, reinvent the wheels. Finally, move to a new NoSQL if and when it makes sense, right? 10 million users to infinity, right? More fine tuning of your application would be needed. So if you're talking about 10 million plus users, we need more fine tuning. We need more service oriented architecture features functionality. So you further have to subdivide your services and features. You have to create more services, going from multi-AZ to multi-region, because now we have a 10 million user base. So most likely it's a global application. So you have to think about multi-region strategy. You have to possibly start to build custom solutions. You have to deeply analyze your entire stack to present a good business case. And you can build serverless whenever possible, right? That's it. That's it for this webinar, guys. And these are some of the links. So if you are interested to know more about web solutions and solutions on AWS, you can refer to these links, right? Thank you, guys. So we have a Q&A session now. So if you guys have any questions, just drop your message in the chat and we'll take it. We'll take the questions now. So I think this is a very comprehensive and very detailed slide. So I just skipped based on some of the services like X-Ray and other, which is not relevant for this webinar. We'll cover it deeply in the upcoming webinar. Right. Guys, so if you have any question, you can just put your questions in the Q&A section and we'll take it one by one. Does Lightsail support SQL database? Yes, you can run MySQL database on Lightsail. Are you referring to SQL Server from Microsoft, or you mean MySQL? MySQL is supported on Lightsail. No, SQL Microsoft you have to run on EC2 instance. No, SQL Microsoft has to be on an EC2 instance. And it adds more value to put Microsoft SQL Server on an EC2 instance than on Lightsail, right? So first of all, it's not there, and second, had it been there, it's make more sense to put it on EC2 instance. Lightsail is for something really small. When you wanted to be up and running very, very quickly, you can make use of Lightsail. Yes, so Windows hybrid. I believe you're referring to Windows and SQL BYOL, right? When we talk about SQL hybrid or Windows hybrid, you're referring to BYOL, correct? Okay. So yes, so there is a license mobility, license portability program from AWS, and if you meet those license mobility requirement, then you can bring your own license for Windows and SQL Server on AWS. It is possible. But just make sure to go through the requirement of the program, right? And if you meet the requirement, then you can bring your Windows Server and SQL licenses on AWS. All right, guys, any question, something which is not clear, you can just ask and we'll take those questions. Yes, you can have AWS WAF. So WAF will integrate with your load balancer and you can have AWS WAF. AWS WAF is supported, yes, to answer your question. AWS has its own WAF, web application firewall. All right, I think that's it, guys, from my side. Thank you all. Thank you very much for joining this webinar. Thank you. Welcome, Yusuf. So we really appreciate your time. Apologies for the delay. We had a challenge while connecting or while hosting this session. So due to which we had to delay the webinar by 30 minutes. Right, so apology for that. So that's it, guys, from my side. I'm looking forward to see you in the next webinar. Thank you, guys. Bye. Kusai?